Hello and welcome to Queen City Profiles, a podcast brought to you by the Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library. This is the show where we bring in prominent members of the Charlotte community for a conversation. My name is Beth Pierce. I'm a librarian here at Charlotte-Mecklenburg Library, and with me today is Joni Deutsch. It's Deutsch, right?
Yeah.
Joni Deutsch. Okay, good.
Like Joni German. Sprechen Sie Deutsch, except I can't.
Joni Deutsch is head of podcasts at WFAE, Charlotte's NPR station, and is the host and creator of Amplifier, which is a new music podcast that explores the Charlotte music scene and has recently hit the top music podcasts on Apple. That is amazing.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it.
Joni also acts as producer for WFAE's other podcasts, including She Says, FAQ City, and Southbound. In 2018, Joni was recognized by the Charlotte Agenda's 30 Under 30 list as a young leader impacting the city of Charlotte. Welcome, Joni. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for letting me be here.
So we're going to start off with the obvious question, since it seems like no one is ever from Charlotte, myself included. Where are you originally from, and what brought you here?
I am from Charleston, West Virginia, born and raised there, and I was working at the NPR station there, which is a statewide station, and PBS as well. And my boyfriend of X number of years moved down from Charleston to Charlotte for a job here, and that was a few years ago. And so that was my time to kind of visit him and kind of see what Charlotte was about. And I was just waiting for that opportunity to continue public media, but here in Charlotte. And WFAE had a wonderful opportunity, and I couldn't say no to it. So I've been here now since November of 2017. So almost a year.
Wow. And you've done so much in just a year.
It's been a lot. I keep forgetting that it's only been less than a year, but it's been really great. Each day has been so different from the next. And I think that's why I like my job so much. It's like I can do so many different things with so many different people and organizations, and it's never the same.
Great. Can you give me a little bit about your background?
Yeah. So I mentioned born and raised in West Virginia. I did not mention that I'm a huge dog fan. That's a huge part of my background. I actually started my schoolwork in science, and I was doing pre-medicine as my track. Yeah. Obviously, that didn't go over well for me because I am in radio now. But along the way in undergrad, as I was in the lab doing research on rats and metabolic syndrome, and the rats were fine. They're very cute. They're still alive. I was wanting to do something more for fun for me, and I loved music and I loved media. I'm one of those pop culture nerds that can connect the dots between an actor and like some random film. And I saw that there was a campus notice that encouraged folks to become a college radio DJ. And so I was like, yeah, I love making mixtapes. That's the application, is to make a mixtape. Let me see what I can do. I got on the radio there. Friday night, 10 p.m. Friday show called the DJ Joni Show. Yeah, I know. 2 people were listening. They were my parents. That turned into a assistant music director position at the station, and then turned into assistant general manager. And I just really loved music. And I didn't know that music could be a career, radio could be a career. Right. And then that was it. So ever since then, that was almost 10 years ago, I've been working in music discovery, been doing radio, on air, online. And with online, I did a lot of podcasts. So that's where I am today, just a lot of nerddom, a lot of nerding out and geeking out. But I think that's why I like my job so much, is I can kind of be myself, both in and out of the workplace.
We're big fans of nerddom at the library.
I can tell.
We're cool. Can you tell me a little bit more about your role as producer, kind of like all the responsibilities that go into that?
How much time do we have? I was reading something recently about this word producer, because it's just a weird placeholder. It kind of combines so many different elements. So depending on the podcast that I work with, I could be anything from a part-time editor of it to a sound designer, the project manager to the host. I mean, it really just depends on what they need me for. I think if anything, I'm kind of the guide, where like almost like a library book. They can open me up like a how-to to podcasting, and they can look to chapter 10 for, ways to engage with the community. What are ways that I can use audio to encourage listeners to respond and engage with me? Chapter 5 is, what can I do to make the music pop, or ways that I can make the audio really interesting, and just go back and forth in this book. So really, whatever they need me to be as a producer, I can be there. And I listen to enough podcasts, not just locally, but nationally, internationally, where I can kind of say, well, I know for reference that Serial with Sarah Koenig used this really well in their podcast, and maybe we can apply that to what we're doing for She Says, our investigative podcast.
Very cool. Thank you for tying that in with the book theme.
Well, I mean,
It's very apropos.
My mom was in charge of a library, or she was on the board for a library in West Virginia,
Oh, cool.
and she took me to read aloud, like every single day. In the summer, I went to our local library every single day with her into the summer reading camps, and I excelled. I mean, like, I did a lot for the library, with the library, and that's one of my favorite things is books.
Well, we love to hear that. How do you find the stories and topics of your pieces? Like, where do the ideas for your podcasts come from?
So I guess individually they come from, it's a combination of the host and the audience. So for instance, with Southbound, which is our kind of Southern interview podcast with host Tommy Tomlinson, he kind of figures out, who is someone that could speak to something in an engaging way. So our recent episode was with Brooklyn Decker, who is a Charlotte native. She's an actress, a model, a philanthropist, a writer, all those things. And her to be able to talk to not just one subject, but many, in her experience in Charlotte. So he kind of decides, is there something timely like football season, that there's someone that can speak to that and how it relates to living and being in the South.
Okay.
For She Says, which is our investigative podcast, that came from the mind, in a way, of Sarah D'Elia, who's the host. She's a reporter at the station on the crime and arts beat.
Ooh.
I know they go together quite well. And, it was just this kind of idea of this story that was brought up by a sexual assault survivor to the station. And how could you serialize that, or to really flesh out the reporting of it to make it stand out on its own and be impactful? And it has been. She Says hit the top 100 podcasts, or 200, the top 200 podcasts on Apple this summer, which is a major achievement. And then for FAQ City, back to the audience, FAQ City is our audience-powered podcast. The audience decides what we answer. So the audience could ask us, why is Uptown called Uptown rather than Downtown? Why is Charlotte so weird that way? And our reporter and host, Nick Delicannell, can report on that with a historical lens of, well, back in the 50s and 40s, this is what it was originally called, and now it's come to this point. So for each of these podcasts, it's a mix of editorial judgment, but then also just what is something that the audience really wants? Because we can say all we want, that, like, you like vanilla ice cream.
Right.
You might like vanilla ice cream, but it's better if you tell us, and that way we can kind of meet in the middle and figure out, well, you like vanilla, but you also like gummy bears on top, which I do.
I don't think I've ever tried gummy bears on top.
Oh, it's amazing. So good. I also came back from Italy recently, and they didn't do anything like that. It was more like you get 2 flavors in a cup with a little waffle cone on top, and you call it a day. So, but again, a conversation. You don't know that until you ask around.
Right. I'm a strictly peanut butter cup.
I like it too.
Ice cream.
I was like, how dare you do peanut butter cup? Oh,
Get out of here right
no,
now.
I love that one too.
Where do you find your inspiration personally?
Bob Ross. No, cut that out. Where do I find my inspiration personally? A few different things, a few different ways. For music, I just love exploring different genres in different countries. So I find a lot of inspiration looking into like what Norway or Iceland is doing for music. And it's, I don't know, it's a weird thing, but when you wire your head around something for so long, you think that's commonplace. But then when you look outside into other genres of music, for example, then I'm kind of like, oh, so there is another way to approach that thought. And also just the mood of it. Listening to a different genre of music, high tempo, low tempo, it kind of gears you up in a weird way, a different way, so that you kind of, just like working out, Like it makes you want to work out harder, makes you want to slow down and relax. So music is a big thing for me. For other inspiration, I just really like listening to podcasts. That is my job, but it's also what I like to do. So trying to see what other stations and people are doing and seeing how they're responding to subjects or engaging with people. And then I also have to say that my dog inspires me.
Aw.
He's a Polish lowland sheepdog, and he inspires me by being really cute. And then I'm reminded that I should be grounded, because if a Polish lowland sheepdog can live through 2018, I can as well.
That was fantastic. Thank you. Just a little plug for the library here. We just recently started circulating podcasts for free with a library card. What advice would you give to a novice just starting their own podcast?
Ooh, good question. I'd say do what is true to you. Granted, you can dive into waters that you're not familiar with and do a subject or a podcast topic like that. That's totally fine. Do it. But do something that you feel like is an extension of who you are and what you want to do, which I would apply that to anything else, a job that you're going to do,
Right.
a place that you want to be in. But the second big thing I'd recommend is just not only think about the podcast as an extension of yourself, but as a bridge to the community, to the listener. So I mentioned earlier about how the topics of our podcasts are kind of determined in a way by the audience. So I would just recommend thinking of your podcast not just as something that you know is going to be great, but as something that your listener is actually going to value in their lives. What's a question that they're asking that you could answer in your podcast or engage with them over? What's something that's missing in conversations or in media outlets or online that you can kind of fill that void with your voice, your perspective, your information? So again, it's kind of a combination of what you want to do, but also what the audience would truly enjoy seeing you do.
I think that's one thing that I really appreciated when y'all did She Says, because there's 8 million murder podcasts out there, and I probably listen to most of them, to be honest. But just to tell, one woman's story was amazing. Yeah.
And along the way, too, the fact that Sarah and Alex, who's another reporter on the podcast, they did a great job of encouraging listeners to, if they felt safe enough to share their stories, listeners from not just Charlotte but international, around the world could send us a voicemail or an email and tell us their story and have this be a communal experience. And I think that's something of podcasting. There's a misconception that podcasting is just for your ears only,
right.
One person. But it's actually an intimate experience that you share with a number of people. Even if they aren't in the room with you, it is a communal activity.
So this year, Joni, you were recognized by Charlotte Agenda's 30 Under 30 as a young leader impacting the city of Charlotte. What does that accomplishment mean to you?
That I was born in 1992 and that I am under the age of 30. It really does mean that, but I'm very grateful for that, being recognized that way, just because I still, in some very small ways, feel like a West Virginia fish in a North Carolina pond, which is much bigger. But I really appreciate being recognized, because if you look at the other people on that list, I mean, you have people from all sectors, not just media, but from nonprofit, from business, politics, and I think that kind of means that, at least in the line of work I'm in, which is public radio, public media, podcasting, music discovery, that's valued in Charlotte. And in a time where media sometimes is seen as lesser than, or not as something to support, I think that's a positive sign that our work is being valued, and we can only go up from here. But it does mean I was born in 1992. That's what 30 Under 30 means to me.
Oh, you make me feel old. How would you, this is totally switching gears, wait, sorry, rewind. How would you define WFAE's and by extension your place in the community? So do you feel like public radio stations have a different mission than other commercial news outlets and media content channels?
I think by the definition of public media and the mission of it, or even just the business side of things, it is different. Just because, you look at commercial media versus public media or non-commercial media, and you're not going to hear what is typically defined as a commercial on NPR stations. But on the other hand, commercial media has a lot of great capabilities. So I think there is a difference, but in terms of the place or my place or the place of public media in the world, I just go back to my days of watching shows like Wishbone on PBS, or
You're such a cute dog.
He was the best dog. The best dog. But I go back to those days of Carmen Sandiego and Arthur watching when I was a little kid. I had no clue that could be a career. I enjoyed it because it was made for the public without this kind of consumer interest to it. And in the sense of they weren't trying to sell you, Kool-Aid in the Wishbone TV show. And I think that's why public media is still valuable decades after those experiences I had when I was younger. It still is timeless, but it's also relevant to what people need and want. And it really is funded by the public. So long as the public wants it to be around, it'll still be funded. And knock on wood, 50 years after the Public Broadcasting Act was signed, we're still around. And I hope that we will be for another 50 years and more.
How would you define community engagement? And why do you believe community engagement is important for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg community?
Community engagement is such a sticky word. It's even more sticky than, I would say, producer. To me, it means a conversation. And it's not a one-sided conversation. It means a give and take. Public radio, just like with other media outlets, sometimes we get into a habit of just saying things or sharing things, and we don't exactly ask for the audience to chime in. Granted, WFAE has done a really great job of doing public conversations with Charlotte Talks, or podcasts like She Says and FAQ City, where we're encouraging folks to chime in, or Amplifier, where we ask musicians from the community to submit their music and be a part of the series in that way. So if anything, it's just a way to have reciprocity in the media, and to know that we're not just sharing our own perspective, but we're trying to create a melting pot, so that others are able to, add their ingredients to the mix, and we can have a really interesting ambrosia salad. So I guess the community engagement is it's creating that salad, and to do so, you need to have both sides interacting with each other. And it needs to be in a meaningful way, and not like a throwaway thing, like send us your stuff, but then you never respond to the person who says that.
I'm going to ask you about Amplifier. Could you kind of talk a little bit about your new project, Amplifier?
I'd love to. So Amplifier is WFAE's latest podcast initiative, hosted and produced by myself. I'll do another take of that because I think I ate that. Amplifier is another music initiative. It's hosted and produced by myself, and I also have another producer, Cole Del Charco. And basically, it's just an exploration of the Charlotte music scene. When I was in West Virginia, at the NPR station there, I did a weekly music program that was eclectic. The promise was that the program would never play the same exact song twice. Because there's so much music out there, why should we repeat it? And along the way with that program, I did a local music podcast about West Virginia music, because most people assumed that West Virginia had only Brad Paisley and banjos to offer to the musical world. Maybe Bill Withers, if people remembered that Bill Withers was actually from West Virginia, but very rarely they don't. Or very rarely they forget. But very rarely they know that. And I came to Charlotte, thinking if West Virginia has a music scene that's undiscovered, surely Charlotte will have one that is there, more active in the community, that people know about, so that if I ask them as I moved to Charlotte last year, what is the Charlotte music scene like? Where can I find it? And who are your favorite acts from the area? People tell me. But my experience, for the most part, at least in the different groups I interacted with, didn't really know anything about it. They kind of shrugged their shoulders. And those were people that were natives here, or people that had lived here for like 2 decades or a decade. So I thought, I know there's more to this story. I know there's actually great music here. I don't know what it is yet, but I want to figure it out. And Amplifier was the way to encourage the community through a call out to say, hey, submit your music, go to wfae.org/amplifier. Any genre, could be anything at all. You don't have to be a recorded artist or a big label artist. Just send it our way. I expected 50 or 100 submissions, and we received more than 300.
Wow.
Yeah, and the genres, I was almost expecting it to be mostly the singer-songwriter types, like guitar, hat, beard.
Right.
Standard. Standard Americana, folky music. We got a ton of genres.
Wow.
And they're from all over Charlotte. It's not just like Plaza Midwood. I mean, you name a neighborhood.
Where you would think, right?
Right, exactly. But it's all over. And I think that was really encouraging, even with just putting the message out on radio, online, social media. Like, we received that much of a response. And so Amplifier is just an exploration of it. The first month of Amplifier's launch in September, we did a 20 for 20. So 20 different profiles of artists in 20 days. Wow. So once every day for the month, Monday through Friday. Yeah. Not to mention on-air components. We had posters that we put up around Charlotte with the Amplifier logo on it. And it hit the top 30 music podcasts on Apple within launch, up there with like the Tiny Desk concerts, which are one of the... Oh my gosh, yeah. Right, Tiny Desk is like NPR Music's favorite podcast. And the response I received, not just from the musicians, but the listeners, has been great. Like, they're saying that this is one of the best ways that they've been able to discover more about their community through music and art, for music and art. And that's really what the whole point was, to have people realize that there's a lot of great talent here. And if maybe before they could only name Anthony Hamilton and the Avett Brothers as their favorites, now they should be able to name at least 5 or 6 that are their new favorites that they want to tell people about, because Charlotte could be the next music location. It just needs more support from the audience.
Right, it hasn't happened yet.
Yeah, and that's just, I mean, that's great. It could be at some point the New York of the South in terms of music. It could be the LA music scene. But there's so many different folks here that really care about it. And this Amplifier series is just to say, these are people that, like, they maybe don't make that much money making music here, but they're here for a reason. They choose to stay here in Charlotte to make music that they love. And at the very least, we can at least check it out and support them in doing that.
So inspirational.
No, thanks. And I've discovered some of my favorite new artists along the way too. I mean, there's some, and I feature them in the series, that their voices and songs are so good and so professionally done. And it amazes me that Charlotte did not have the infrastructure, or maybe is now and only now in the process of having that infrastructure in place to support them.
Very cool. How are we doing on time? Okay. Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you got like 15 minutes.
Okay.
We're so wrapped up in conversation.
I know.
It's like Terry Gross. This American
Terry
Life.
Gross.
I'm Ira Glass. This American Life.
I know.
I can do a really good Michael McDonald. And by really good, I mean bad, but good.
Oh, no. Don't tease me.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, sadly. Regrettably.
Don't tease me. So I know you haven't been here for very long, just not even a year, which is amazing when you've accomplished so much already. Can you tell me, what is your vision for the Charlotte Mecklenburg Library, and what do you believe is holding the city back from achieving that vision?
Read the question again, because you said Charlotte Mecklenburg Library.
Oh my God.
I was actually about to answer about the library. I was like, I can do something, but it's okay.
Oh my God, that's a totally different podcast. Please cut that out. Thank you. Wow.
That's why we need a producer in the room. See, exactly. Just moments like this.
you.
You think producer just means you set up things? No, it means you're there to say
it just rolls off the tongue. It just rolls off the tongue. Yes, I know. What a time for that conversation. So you have not been here very long. You've only been here less than a year, which is remarkable. What is your vision for the Charlotte-Mecklenburg area, and what do you believe is holding the city back from achieving that vision?
Well, I can speak to a little bit of it, at least when it comes to music, since I feel like that was one of the questions I brought up a lot in the interviews with artists, new and old, or established and emerging, of what could be done, what could the city do to support the music scene. And on that alone, I would say Charlotte needs to figure out a way to encourage artists to support artists so that it doesn't feel like a standalone endeavor, so that it feels like it could be an initiative, a business. I mean, that's what it is. It's a music business. And some artists aren't able to get that because they don't understand the grants that they could apply for, or the communities that they could collaborate with, organizations that could collaborate with for venue space, for recording space, just to get their name out there, the music out there. So I think Charlotte could create a stronger connection to the community, and even just encourage businesses to look at music business in a new way, rather than saying there's a stage over there, or like, I shouldn't say that. So instead of the businesses just saying, okay, artist, go set up in the corner and play music while people drink beer, there could be a bigger and brighter spotlight on music as more than background music. Something that is active, that people are attuned to, rather than just okay, there's some weird person playing in the corner, a banjo and a guitar, let's just not listen to them and keep talking amongst ourselves. So I think there could be things that are done with venues, with local organizations, with the Charlotte-Mecklenburg City Council, initiatives that could be done to really support that scene. Did that make sense?
Yeah, it did.
Okay.
No, I'm just looking at the questions.
Okay. Because you can tell me if I'm an idiot.
No.
This is a big thing that I grew up with here, and it's still one of those things that we haven't really gotten our, but I know the ASC is trying, but they put up the call to artists and give them individual grants, but it's still, we can't support them enough so they stay here in Charlotte.
Oh, that's a good point.
Yeah, and also that they don't. And I don't think a lot of people I interviewed for the series felt like they were being taken advantage of, or they're resentful of Charlotte for the place that they're in. But if something doesn't change soon, I could see this kind of lackadaisical, like laissez-faire kind of thing just continuing, where artists feel like, I'm here, I'll make the music for myself, but no one values me. Why am I really doing this? So I think there's a really great turning point, and along with ASC, I think the Center City Partners, they're doing a great job. They're doing their Music Everywhere initiative. Little things are sprouting up around the city. And I know that some of City Council, they're really supportive of music. I think Larkin and, I can't remember, another individual on the City Council.
Is it Braxton?
It might have been Braxton. Who's on the R&D podcast, R&D in the QC?
Oh gosh.
See? It's going to bother me. Both of them spoke up. Bakari.
Yes.
Yeah. So both of them were speaking out in support of the arts, or the Music Everywhere initiative. So there is support in city government for it. I think we just need to have a more concentrated effort. And it's not just the city. It's organizations. It's the musicians themselves, and media outlets, including WFAE and Amplifier.
I lived in Boston before we moved here most recently, and they had a really cool thing. Some of the town of Somerville, which is outside of Boston, or city of Somerville, which is outside of Boston, but a few of the neighborhoods in Boston had something called Porch Fest, where, there's always like 2 family houses all over the place in Boston, so you would just sign up and say, hey, I'll host a musical act, and then like one day over the summer, it was like a Saturday or Sunday, like houses every 50 feet or so would have like a band or a singer-songwriter or whatever on their porch for a few hours. And so like you would just wander through and there would be concerts all over the place, and then vendors. And I know, I love that idea.
So cool. Boston. Yeah. See, there's like little things like that, going back to the inspiration question. Like, I just like learning how other people in cities and organizations are doing things. Those little things just bring a smile to my face. Like, how can we replicate that on some level and do it here so that it's meaningful? That's so cool. I like that.
Look it up, Porch Fest.
Porch Fest.
What would you say is the most life-changing piece of advice you've received?
I'm going to say one quote, and then I might change it after the fact because my brain's going a little dead. But the one thing I heard when I started in public radio was from my old radio director there in West Virginia, and she said that it's just radio, it's not the end of the world. And me being type A kind of personality, I'm thinking I need to be at 110% at all times or else I'm not doing it well. I think I've reduced that percentage down to like 90% now.
Oh, good job.
Thank you. It's really hard. But I think that's just something that can be applied to any situation. We really, like, especially in nonprofit, we just feel like we are working all the time, nonstop, because we love doing this. It's mission driven. And if we don't do it, what will happen to the institution? All the horrible, like, sky is falling things. But at the end of the day, like, you can still relax and you can still take a long, deep breath, and it's going to be okay. And I think that's something I've had to kind of learn along the way is, if I don't keep in check of what I'm doing with my body and my emotional or physical health, it's not going to do me any good to try to help someone else. It's like it's the quote when you're on an airplane, like, put the face mask on yourself first before you put it on someone else. Right. Yeah, same thing. It's that kind of self-care. I don't know how I feel about the term self-care, but it's that kind of self-care thing that you should take something seriously, but don't make it super, super serious, because it really is not the end of the world in most cases.
If you could write a letter to your future self, what would you say?
Your hair is going to grow bigger. And it has. I
am so jealous of your hair, by the way.
I had a haircut just recently, and I'm looking at the camera right now. I can't even tell I got a haircut. And I'm nearsighted, but I know that it's grown. But thank you. My mom did not have curly hair, so growing up, it was
she didn't know what to do with it.
She didn't know what to do. She had like pin straight hair, short, and I had this like lion mane. But no, what would I tell myself? I think it goes back to the quote that I just mentioned of just having fun along the way, which I do. I have a ton of fun in this job.
That sounds like
I love it. Please don't think I hate it, because I don't.
No.
But I think if I were to write something to myself, it's that things will continue, and that it's going to be a mix of days where you feel like you've conquered the world and days where you just want to hide under your blanket. And some days it's going to be more of the latter than the former, or vice versa. And you can still get through it, and you can still do great things, and that is just going to make you stronger because of it. But also just enjoy yourself. It's going to be a literal ride of sorts, like a roller coaster, and you'll get out of it at the end, pretty unscathed.
I like that. Thinking back over the books and articles you've read throughout your adult life, what book or article has made the biggest impact on you? We have to give you a book question.
No, of course you do.
Sort of in our contract.
What do you do here again?
I know.
Books, right? No, kidding. So the first, I think I'm going to do two books. The first book, going back to my youth, was Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. It's one of my favorite series when I was a kid. I was growing up at the time that they were still like releasing them live, so that I remember, I think maybe they came out once a year, 2 times a year, and whenever it came out, instantly go to wherever it was, got the book, took it out, and then found a place and just sat there and read it for like 8 hours on end. And the series, and I've read the series through a few times since I was, I don't know, like middle school, I think. Super dark. If no one has ever, if this is the first time you're hearing about a series of unfortunate events by Lemony Snicket, you should check it out because it's for all ages. And I think what I liked about it so much back then, and I still do, is that it's very dark, but it's kind of realistic in some ways. You know, it is not the Cinderella story of a happily ever after of sorts. In fact, spoiler alert, the final book in the series is just like unresolved in a number of ways. But you should still read it because I think it just has so many geeky references in it to literature and arts and history. And it makes you want to dive into everything to understand the references and the historical context and to mature a little bit more along the way. And I think that's what I liked about it, is that it wasn't expected. Mm-hmm. And I think that was kind of inspirational of like, not everything's going to be sunshine and like unicorns. And that doesn't mean it's going to be bad. It's going to be pretty cool. But the second book, I think more realistically or more recently that I really enjoyed and was inspired by was I forget the exact title of the book, but it's a James Brown biography. But it only focuses on like a few months of time in his life. And it was during the riots that took place following the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. And at the time, James Brown was set to perform in Boston. And because of the riots that were taking place, the city of Boston was like, we need to shut down the concert. It's not safe. People are going out there. If people go to the concert along the way, they might get, mugged, or they might get attacked or get part of the scuffle. But James Brown's crew had conversations with the city, and they also worked with PBS station there in Boston at the time, WGBH, which is still around. And they decided, no, the concert's going to go on because this is going to be a way to unify the public and to bring them together in a way to act as solace over what happened, but also to just remind them that there are lighter moments. And James Brown can provide that. And they actually broadcast it on WGBH, on the PBS member station there. Yeah, and so people, if they felt like they couldn't leave their house or they just wanted something to lift their spirits, they could watch it live from their televisions in their homes. And I think that, and I just read this book recently, like I'd been working in public media for a few years by the time I read this, but I just thought it was a beautiful moment, not just for music in the country, but and also public media. All these little things coming together for the public good, to show that music could be the thing that combines, that brings people together, unifies them. And I think that was just something really inspirational. It reminded me why I work in public media.
We gotta get the title of that book.
Yeah.
I know,
I forget, it was James Brown, how James Brown saved the soul of America.
Oh, wow.
I think was the name of it. And my mom, so, a couple of years ago, I asked my mom to get me some books for the holidays. Like, that was I swear, for decades, my parents would say, what do you want for Hanukkah or Christmas? And I would say, just get me books. So they'd get me Scooby-Doo books, they'd get me Nancy Drew books. And a couple years ago, I said, Mom, can you get me books that are just like music biographies? Like, I don't even care what they are, just something. And that was one of the books that she gave me. And it's a pretty quick read. I think it's only a few hundred pages. But a substantial amount of it towards the beginning is talking about public media and the media landscape in Boston at the time that James Brown was performing there. And of course it talks about James Brown, like his personality, his band, and how the show went that night. But it's just a really interesting read, and I think it's really timely.
The Hardest Working Man, How James Brown Saved the Soul of America.
That's it. So the book, the book was The Hardest Working Man, How James Brown Saved the Soul of America. Wow. And would recommend, even if you're not exactly a music fan or a James Brown fan or a Boston fan, go Yankees, you can probably learn something from this book that can apply to 2018 and where we are today.
Wow. I love asking people this because there's always a book that I've never heard of, and I've never heard of that one, so thank you.
It was actually, so side off, please take this out, but I, when I was trying to find a job outside of West Virginia, and WFAE was one of the major, wonderful options coming up, I applied to NPR in DC, and in the application process for it, I'm interviewed there, and I just finished reading the book around that time, and so they're asking me, like, what would you do to help remind people why they should support public media? And I brought up the book, because I think that was just one of those things. It's little heard moments of history. Like, for instance, recently, I think earlier this year, I read that Barack Obama was inspired to go to law school because of a report that I think Susan Stamberg did on NPR with the senator or the court judge that, you know, Barack wanted to work under, right?
Oh
and there's a letter that he wrote
Yeah.
to either NPR or Susan Stamberg saying, this is why I'm currently going to law school, is because of this story that you did. And I think those moments, they're not really promoted as much in history books or, you know, even like public media promotions, PR, but they're just really geeky, cool moments of history.
Oh, yeah, totally.
And you think about the impact of stories, whether it's a book or something on radio, and you think, wow, that's one story did that one thing to one person and changed the course of history.
That's very cool. All right. So, Joni, how can listeners learn more about your podcast with WFAE, and where are you on social media?
Oh, yeah. So for podcasts, you can find, or the WFAE's podcasts are She Says, Amplifier, FAQ City, Southbound. You can also find Charlotte Talks, which is our daily talk show. It is in podcast form. You can find all those podcasts on our website, which is WFAE.org. Specifically, if you go to WFAE.org/podcast, you can find all those podcasts there, as well as ways to listen to them on your favorite platform, whether it is Apple, iTunes, Google Play, NPR One, and very recently, we just got on Spotify. So you can listen to the podcast on Spotify, which is really cool for Amplifier, since we made a huge, like, 14-hour Spotify playlist of the musicians who submitted their work to the series, even if we didn't feature them in the actual podcast.
Yeah.
Which I should have mentioned earlier is continuing as a bi-weekly podcast. So there's tons of people to feature. We're going to do that as much as we can. And as for me, people can find me on social media. My handle on Twitter and Instagram is actually my old public radio show in West Virginia, which was A Change of Tune. So people can find me at A Change of Tune on Twitter and Instagram, and on Facebook, or LinkedIn. They can find me under my actual name, which is Joni Deutsch.
Thank you so much, Joni.
Yeah, thank you.
This
for
is
having me
fantastic.
here. Thank you.
This has been an informative, and that just sounds really I'm like,
This
no,
has been wonderful. I am human.
Okay. Thank you so much for being a guest on Queen City Profiles. If anyone is interested in learning more about Joni's work with WFAE, please visit WFAE.org and make sure to follow her on social media accounts she mentioned. Thank you everyone for listening to this episode of Queen City Profiles. To learn more about this and any of our other podcasts, please visit our website, digitalbranch.cmlibrary.org, and follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/cmlibrary or at Twitter at @cmlibrary. And we'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. It was really